So welcome everyone to Reopen Your District with Confidence. Today we are going to discuss the 4 essential pillars to reopening your district with confidence. We're going to keep this program to 1 hour, and I'd like to take this time to just go over some quick pointers. Please enter any questions that you have in the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. We're going to do our best to answer all the questions that we can, and we may combine similar questions into one. A replay of this program will be available on the Titan HST YouTube channel and emailed to you, so you can share the recording with your colleagues and staff if you wish. I am excited to introduce our panel of experts. I'm happy to have known each one of them for some time now. Each is dedicated to campus safety and has been working hard on how we can make the transition back to school a safe one. Dr. Dave Long, the former California Secretary of Education. Dave was appointed by Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger in March 2007. In that role, he served as a policy advisor to the governor on education issues. Dr. Long has more than 40 years of experience in the field of education, ranging from 21 years of classroom teaching to the superintendency. Prior to his appointment by the governor, Dr. Long was the Riverside County Superintendent of Schools. Dr. Long is a former president of the California County Superintendents Educational Services Association and is the chairperson of the Federal Education Safe and Drug-Free Schools and Community Advisory Committee. Todd DeVoe has been a professional emergency manager since 2002. In addition, Todd has a Master's of Public Administration with consecration in urban policy and planning and is a certified emergency manager. Todd is a professor of emergency management at Coastline College, UCI, and is a founding faculty member at the University of Applied Research and Development in Auckland. Vic Merjanian Esquire is founder and CEO of Titan Health and Security Technologies, Inc., and the sponsor of today's program. Mr. Merjanian is dedicated to improving school safety as well as organizational safety, spanning private and public businesses, NGOs, and governmental agencies. Dave, I've had the pleasure of knowing you for several years now. Your dedication to school safety is second to none. What is your view of the challenges we find ourselves in today, and how do you feel educators can overcome them?
Well, thanks, Serena. I really appreciate being involved with this. And this is a tough one because it's tough for all of us. I've got a bunch of newspapers here that have been saving them the last week. The headlines here, the virus alerts key to safe schools. Headlines: schools upfront virus reports key. OC's biggest district gets set to reopen. And by the way, that changed. OC schools ready in the classrooms. So that's really what we're talking about today. And this is from the Orange County Register, and these are all headlines. I'm not talking about just something buried on page 7. So this is extremely important to us right now. And this is all about, as we know, safety, safety, safety. And we don't know the answer, and that's what makes it difficult. So you asked me, the group asked me to talk about some challenges and some potential solutions, which I'll do. I came up with about 50 of them. No, I don't want to scare everybody out there, but I'll just mention about 5 or 6 of them to talk about the challenge and the solution. The first one I just want to mention is the noise. Number one, just the noise, the politics, the blame game, the number manipulation. And that just makes it more confusing for those of you that are sitting out there now as educators. We hear the different numbers from different people. I'll just give you one example that the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, just 48 hours ago released some information to put things in perspective. The survival rate, now not those that have it, because that's running anywhere from 4 to 6% depending on the state and the county, but of those that get it, the survival rate of those, for those from 0 to 19, which would be everything from our preschool to our seniors, the survival rate is 99.997%. And then it goes upward, but even 20 to 49 is 99.98. Now, when it gets to 70 and above, and I'll be the only one on this program that fits in that category, but that's still 94.6%. The point being, we want to pay attention to the experts and the numbers. Having said that, because of the politics and because we're all in different local districts and counties, what the board says and what the community says, we have to pay attention to. And that's what we're talking about today. So number one, just the noise. And the solution to that is just try to shut out the noise if you can. For local and county people, and you're the ones that know in your district. So try to, as much as you can, shut out some of that federal and state noise and do it on a local level. Second challenge that I would see is leadership. And this is a big one. We need assistance, we need a direction. I just kind of mentioned it right here, and that is we hear from the federal, we hear from the state, sometimes they do not coincide. That's confusing. CDE, sometimes it doesn't coincide, sometimes it's confusing. So I would get back to the same solution that I mentioned with number one, listen to the consciousness of your community. I'm going to repeat that. Listen to the consciousness of your community and then develop the action plan from that because they are your constituents. The third challenge I would say is what's the plan? And you will have to develop that. And many of you already have it well on its way. When do you open? What's the delivery system? Are you going to go online? You're going to go hybrid? You're going to go face to face? In this morning's paper, when I said that, I just got it about 10 minutes ago. In the paper today, I'm just looking at it. Newport Mesa to consider delay of hybrid learning for intermediate and high schools. They have a meeting today to look at delaying perhaps to the middle of December and maybe January. The next article right below that, district, and this is about Fullerton then, district to resume in-person instruction on November 2nd. So that illustrates my point that it's a local decision. Everybody's right, but it's a local decision. So that's why you're going to hear me say for these solutions, pull it back to your community and listen to the conscious of your community. Another thing that I want to mention is with the plan is involve everybody. I've talked to several superintendents. They said, well, the board and I decided. I said, the board and you decided what? What did the community say? What did the teachers say? What did the PTA say? What did the students say? So please think about what the solution to listen to everyone and just and I know that 99% do this, but a saying for that is, let's not do it to them, let's do it with them. And then everybody has a buy-in. Another, number four, I would say is a challenge is the stress of it all. And that includes every single human being that's involved with this. But now we're talking about education. So that's going to be everything from parents to students to teachers. Tune into that and listen very carefully. Because here's another, we can't control it, but we can sure offer up some solutions that are going to be helpful, such as very, very positive and in-depth staff development and counseling, ramp up the counseling for our kids. Some of them are going to really have some psychological problems that they didn't have before. So will staff members. So we have to pay attention to that. Some other things that I've talked to superintendents about that I think will really offer up some positive things, just like even it's going to change. We have to be creative here. And some of them have developed teams that go into the classrooms or even online with them so that they have the principal involved, teachers involved, and they observe and then give suggestions. And then they have discussions that lowers that stress level. So we all know that it's going to be stressful for everybody. So let's try to reduce that. And this isn't going to go away tomorrow. So that becomes very important. Number five would be liability concerns. This came up from almost all the superintendents I talked with and board members. What if we make the wrong decision and someone gets sick or hurt? remember that if we didn't have COVID-19, that would still be apparent, because we have things that happen every day and we still have to pay attention. Now we're talking about the COVID, and it just ramps it up a bit. So again, I would say the solution, just make as many decisions as possible together, and do whatever is necessary to keep every student safe. And the last challenge, I've got about 40 more, as I said, but this will be my last one. And I just made this word up and I use it. A challenge is, I would call it systematic abandonment, meaning that all of us as human beings, but especially in education, we have a plate. And then as new things come along, we just keep putting more things on that same plate, and we never take anything off. So when I talk about systematic abandonment, I'm just saying in this situation especially, prioritize, take some things off that plate. Things are going to change. Instruction's going to change. Delivery system's going to change. And budgets are going to change big time. And I'll end with this, because they talked to a superintendent last week and I said, how are you coming with budget? He said, it's really tight. I think we'll be okay for several months, but we'll be laying off classified teachers soon. But he said, I just spent over $300,000 on cleaning supplies. I said, is that the number one priority? This is airborne. So, I mean, you have to clean, but just please prioritize. What about things like student density? What about things like parent reporting? What about tracing? Those, in my mind, those things far outstrip the purchase of over $300,000 of cleaning supplies. So I would just suggest to people, keep that priority, and there'll be a lot of people talking to you, but do the things for your students, like the density, like the reporting, like the tracing, the things that will really make a difference for our students. So with that, I'll close. I've got another 20. We'll save that for another time. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Dave, for that in-depth answer. Todd, what are the issues that emergency management is seeing with the COVID-19 response and recovery? Do you see an end soon?
Oh, I wish I'd seen it soon. I don't think it is, and we can get in that a little bit later. But I think we need to be planning for a long term on this, not a short term action. Some of the issues that we're seeing here on the emergency management side and business continuity side is exercising and activating your plan. With business continuity, we're doing it kind of right now, right? With the idea of using Zoom meetings or Zoom classroom type stuff, moving classroom instruction to online is actually one of the things we could use for business continuity. Also, the ability to communicate with our parents and with the students, depends on the age, obviously, what's going on, and having that real-time communication is key, because at the end of the day, people do not want to get lost in that shuffle, right? They want to know what's going on. They want to know if the school's going to be closed that day. I grew up in upstate New York. And in the wintertime as a kid, we were always excited about when it's snowing out, and we'd put on the radio to see what schools closed, or watch the TV scroll by what schools are closed. And that was like, that communication piece that was going on here. But today we have technology, and I'm sure Vic will talk about this a little bit more, that can actually be used to communicate what's going on. If you're doing AB or platoon, if you call it that, classroom settings. So that type of stuff. And so those are the type of things that we're thinking about on the emergency management side. And then the long-term planning for this. This is not going away within the next 2, 3, 4 months, right? We're looking years down the road, right? And how do we create some sort of resiliency and normalcy based upon what we're seeing here? So that being said, is like, my daughter is 8 years old. All right. And she has her little dolls. And this is how this is affecting her in a way, is that she's actually making little masks to put on her dolls. Right. And so it's becoming part of who we are necessarily, and understanding that this is a process. So, we need to think about that long term. How do we move to what normal will be? I hate to say this. I don't think that we're going to have the normal quickly, at least, of what it used to be. If you think about going to the airport today, and this is where I am, years ago, when I say years ago, 10, 20 years ago, you would be able to walk up to the gate with your family members and see them onto the plane. Today, you're not going to do that. You have to go through security. You have to go have the ticket to be past that secure zone, things like this. And now it's part of our new normal, right? We're going to have to start to see things like this with, hand sanitizing, cleaning stations, maybe masks, depending on the time of the year, things like that are going to be part of that new normal. And so you're going to have this. Contact tracing is part of the new normal, right? Because that way we can tell who's gotten it, who's been exposed to it. And maybe instead of having to close down the entire school, you could always just put those people that had that direct contact with that person onto alternative learning methods such as Zoom classrooms and things like this. Being able to have communication, two-way communication with your parents, more than just a phone call that they can do quickly with their phone. With this technology is amazing, right? We all have a computer in our pocket nowadays. And so there's no excuse for us not to be able to communicate back and forth with everybody inside your group. And I think that's key. When we do exercises and drills, the first thing that we always put up on our board, right? And I almost want to have it already pre-written, is communication issues, right? Communication issues. And I think this is where we fail as an organization. It's great. We say we, the collective we of organizations, is that we don't communicate enough. And I think sometimes we feel that we are, but we're not giving the information out in ways that's digestible. So I think having a good, solid communication plan so you can communicate with your parents, you can communicate with the students of what's going on, so they're not lost in that shuffle. I have an older son who's in high school, and they communicate directly with those kids, right, through the messaging and so forth. So knowing what level that you have and being able to include them as part of the plan as well. Dave mentioned that in his talk about regarding including your parents. Include the students as well. You guys know, you deal with them on a daily basis. They're intelligent kids and they understand it. They want to be part of the process. They're not just something an obstacle in this plan. They're going to be part of the solution as well. And so make them part of the solution. Make the PTA part of the solution. Make the unions part of the solution. Make the community part of that solution. And that's what we see as emergency management, is being able to make it a resilient and anti-fragile community, if you will, by bringing everybody in together and working towards things in one goal. I want to close with this, that as we develop this, when I say develop, we're seeing this thing come through. We might see different strains come through, and being able to be up, leaning forward, if you will, when you're talking about, inoculations and vaccines and things like this, right? Again, we need to communicate why it's a positive thing to everybody involved. Okay. And I know it's scary. I know it's unknown, and that's why it's scary. But every year we get the flu shot now, right? It's something that's part of our yearly lives. My doctor is always, trying to get me to get multiple flu shots. I swear, every time I walk in, they want to give me one. But I think it's important to understand that this is going to be part of what we do in the future, and to be able to embrace that and to be able to make it less scary. I think that's part of the thing that we can do as educators as well, is to reduce that fear factor. And you do that simply by bringing in and getting them involved, getting the people involved, getting your PTAs involved, like Dave said, getting the union involved, getting your older students involved, and making it part of the culture.
It looks like we have a lot of work ahead of us. Thank you for that analysis of the current situation. Vic, you have dedicated your life to improving school safety by using technology. What are the COVID-19 challenges that you're helping to address with Titan HST?
So I think one of the biggest things that we've noticed out there is, there's more work than ever for administrators to do, right? Managing a school district, managing a school is enough work on the day-to-day. Then you add things like standardized testing, and you add things like safety, just with all the school shootings, unfortunately, that our country typically faces, and natural disasters. And that's kind of a full-time job in and of itself. Now you have to manage a remote workforce. And keep in mind that remote workforce in some sense includes the thousands of children as well too, right? I mean, what other business has thousands and thousands of anywhere 3, 4, 5-year-old up to 18-year-olds? That's not an easy quote unquote workforce to manage. And so basically, what you need is systems of automation that will take and relieve processes and work off of administrators. It needs to be one and done, to the point that that Dr. Long highlighted. Basically, there's more and more coming on the plate. And if you keep adding onto that plate, at some point, there's only so much that you can do. And so where we see technology really coming into this is hitting some of the touch points that Dr. Long and Todd mentioned as well. Specifically, the 4 areas that we see and have identified as pain points in trying to get students and staff back to school safely is, the first is pre-screening, right? I mean, we use all these fancy words these days, but it's not a new concept. Whether you went to school last year before the pandemic or 50 years ago, there was a basic principle. If you were sick, don't come to school, right? This is not new. This is not new. So the notion of being able to pre-screen people daily, that might be a little bit more new, but that's where technology comes in. And that's where, if you create an automated process for pre-screening, then the admin and the staff don't have to do anything on a daily basis. The second point that comes up with this, as mentioned earlier on this conference, was the point of contact tracing. And basically, you need to have a way that's better. I mean, we talk to sites and they say, well, we've got paper and pencil, and we try and track and ask Joe who he met with, and if he was near Bob or Todd or Amy or Betty, it's crazy. So you've got to have, as Todd mentioned, everyone has a phone. For the people who don't have a phone, you can have passive tags. You need a solution that automates contact tracing. And one, frankly, that's privacy centric. People don't want to be tracked everywhere. So have a system that can contact trace, and more specifically, only at the site. Furthermore, to that point, it's even better if you can contact trace more specifically. The fewer the people who you're able to identify, the fewer the people who are impacted at a site. Now, you don't want to do that by missing people, but if you have a system that's very accurate, you're able to do that. So we've talked about pre-screening, which we've always talked about, right? Keeping sick people out. If a sick people slips through the cracks, sick person slips through the cracks, I should say, then with contact tracing, you can identify who they cross paths with and help identify, isolate, and quarantine those individuals as well. So the next 2 pieces of the puzzle come down to basically population. As Dr. Long mentioned, when we were in class, when I started out school many years back, we used to have 10, 15, 20 people in a class. By the time I was in high school, we had classes that pushed 30 to 40 people in a class. Those classrooms, we were told 20 years ago, so this was 20 years ago, making 40 years ago, those classrooms used to have 15 to 20 people in it. If you pack 30 to 40 people in the same classroom that held 15 to 20, it's going to be tight. And so by having things like population density monitoring, whether it's in a classroom or, more importantly, in less controlled environments like cafeterias and auditoriums and libraries and those areas, you're able to monitor and make sure that population densities are not exceeded. Again, the virus is bad. Also, it's not magic. So it doesn't go through brick walls. It doesn't go through glass. If you're all, 20, 30 people in a tiny room breathing on each other, that's probably not great. So there are solutions out there that can help navigate these things, again, in an automated fashion. The last and final piece of this that we believe is important is sanitization confirmation. And that ties in with everything else that we're talking about pre-screening and contact tracing. If you know that there was an infection in a specific room, then wouldn't it be wonderful if you could confirm sanitization in those areas? Not only does that prevent liability exposure, if someone got sick somewhere else, you could say there was no one who was sick in that area, and the person who got sick probably got sick, not at the school site, but elsewhere. For example, if someone was sick in room A and the sanitization device went in room A afterwards, and someone called in and said they were sick, but maybe over the weekend and they were never in room A, then you could definitively demonstrate that they were not sick in that area. To the point that Dr. Long highlighted, going around and trying to sanitize an entire school every hour is a fool's errand. But if you were able to do things like lower population densities, if you're able to do things like put better filters on air systems that are circulating the air, and if you're able to identify and properly sanitize the areas, I mean, guys, this is going to date me a little bit, but I graduated high school in 2003. There was no soap. There was no soap dispenser in the men's restroom the entire time I was there. Fast forward 20 years. There still is no soap nor soap dispenser in the men's or boys' restrooms in those high schools that I went to. The irony of that situation is now the PTA and parents on next door are up in arms as an action item to bring in soap dispensers into the bathrooms. So, maybe, I don't know, this goes back to kids used to play in the mud and now they play on the screens, but, Those are the kinds of things. There are common sense solutions. We also see a lot of sites where they do things like prop doors open going into the buildings, right? What an easy solution that is. Instead of having a handle that 3, 4, 5,000 people are touching, what if you prop those doors open during the periods where students are going in and out of class, right? There are very simple solutions that significantly reduce the liability and the touch points that can increase the spread of this infection. So from a technological standpoint, I think the solution is looking for things that will automate the process so that it is not more burdensome on administrators and frankly students. And with that, the 4-part solution that we believe is the solution is to have an automated system of pre-screening with ingress control, with QR codes or something that lets you know if people have cleared. So pre-screening system, a contact level tracing kind of system, something that's going to do some sort of population density monitoring, and lastly, something that strategically confirms sanitization. And that we believe can help sites reopen safely and get back to whatever the new normal is.
Thank you for all those useful tips, Vic. So I'd love to turn this over to the audience and let's answer some questions from our guests. Okay. I'll throw this to the panel. How important is contact tracing really?
Well,
So
let me.
Yeah, I can just kick off from a technological standpoint. I think the importance of the contact trace is very simple. The more people who are out at a site, the more the site is impacted. And contact tracing allows you to minimize the number of people, whether it's students, parents, staff, administrators. Contact tracing allows you to minimize the disruption to your site by specifically identifying, ideally, the lowest number of affected parties.
Mhm.
If you're a school, your business, whatever it is, and you know that there was a virus at the school, a lot of sites would shut down the entire site. You can't open and close schools on a daily basis. It's not a thing. You can't do that. But if you can properly identify the 3 or 4 people who are affected, you pull them out, it's much less disruptive. And that's the only way to really get back to a sense of operational normality.
On the emergency management point, contact tracing is something that we've been doing for years. I mean, we actually know who the first person in the United States was to have the 1918 flu, and it's traced back to an Army cook in Kansas. So we know who he is, right? So it's something that's like unheard of and scary and new. This is something we've been doing for years. If you think about, Patient Zero, if we've watched any of those movies like the, Contagion or whatever, we know who Patient Zero is. We trace all the way back to Patient Zero. We know who the first person who had AIDS was. Those things are stuff that we've been doing for years. But the ability to do this for your specific site quickly, I think, is key to keeping the children safe, your staff safe, your parents, without, I don't say concerned, but with less concern about sending their kids to school. The school board will understand what's going on. Those are all very important portions of why contact tracing is key. And like Vic was saying, if you can bring it down to 2 or 3 people that have been contacted by this stuff, you don't have to close the entire school down, which I think, operational speaking, it just makes common sense at that point. So I highly recommend that you have some sort of contact tracing platform. Obviously, Titan HST's contact tracing is seamless. And so that's my take on it. I don't know what the policy part of it is, Dave, but what do you think?
Well, a couple questions popped into my mind when Vic was talking, when you were talking, and that is through the years as an educator, one of the things that will constantly come up with parents, and justifiably so, is what about the privacy thought with their student? They're always concerned with that. So I know, Vic, you mentioned it, but that can be a big issue with parents when we start to talk about things like we're talking about now. So what's your thought on that?
I completely agree. And this is really a very funny thing to bring up. I mean, you've got to admit, this is kind of funny. People trade all of their personal information on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn. Every time it says, do you know this person? A lot of those is based on the phones. When you're walking around a school or a building or a mall, when your phones pass each other, they're pinging the phones and looking who you walked by. So it's really funny. I mean, Gmail reads every one of your emails that go through, right? So the world has already traded privacy for convenience. Having said that, maybe here it's different because it's not in the fine print. Maybe it's a little bit more blatantly obvious. And in that respect, privacy is important. It should be important everywhere. And for that reason, we believe that the way to approach contact tracing is to approach it in a privacy-centric manner. Our particular solution, but I'm not here to necessarily hawk our solution. We believe the approach to it is to basically limit it by geofencing to the site. So when you step onto the site, the contact tracing turns on. When you leave the site, it turns off. That's our take on it. It should be privacy-centric. But also it's kind of interesting where people draw the line on privacy or lack thereof.
No, and I thank you for that. It just triggered, and I hear you loud and clear. We have changed for now, but those parents are from a different time. So sometimes that just spills over into conversations like this. And then the other thing, and Todd, you'd asked about this, or listening to both of you, it made me think, I heard on the news night before last, de Blasio in New York, they had opened elementary schools face to face, and they picked 9 schools in New York City, and they tested 1,357 kids, and there were 2 negatives. So they're going to close the schools now. So just what we're talking about, the things that we're talking about become so critically important, because I think we'd all agree, you don't close down 9 schools when 2 kids test positive. When at that age, and I mentioned that when we started, the survival rate is 99.997%. So my point is, I think the technology that you're talking about, Vic, becomes critically important for educators to make decisions.
Yeah, and that's the thing with this topic too. It's kind of interesting because it's so multifaceted, and it's really odd. I don't know if it's the media, if it's the politics. I mean, this conversation, not our conversation here, but the national domestic conversation, is such a black and white conversation. It's shut everything down or open everything up. And there are risk factors to students being sick. And I mean, first of all, we talk about death versus not death, but there are millions of people across the world now and who have permanent lung damage from the virus. So there are issues there. Generally, a cold or flu doesn't cause life. So there are things that are arguably worse than death in the sense that you have lifelong conditions now. But the thing is, it doesn't have to be this black and white. There's a balance between going in with 30 to 40 people in a packed classroom versus not being there at all, right? If you're able to do these things like contact tracing, if you're able to do things like the distancing, if you're able to have policies in place like masks, what we should be probably striving at as a society is some sort of middle ground to this that balances the health interests, combined with, one of the things that doesn't get talked about as much is, there are societal and economic impacts of this. Not every student has a room in their own house by themselves where they could learn, right? I mean, schools in many senses, not to say that all schools are funded the same or that the education is the same in all schools, but to some level, it was an ability to kind of level the playing field in that all students would be in that same classroom. Again, not saying that all schools are of the same caliber, quality, whatever. But now when you further push students into learning from home where, everyone's home setting it's not the same, you're creating much larger potentially problems than if you could properly navigate a reopening in a safe way.
Thank you.
100%.
Yeah. Next question. Is there a recommended threshold to notify local health authorities of positive test results among employees?
Oof. That's a privacy question as well, and maybe even possibly HIPAA. It depends on how that goes. And so that's been one of the fights that we've had in the emergency management side, is trying to get that information from employers and about who is sick and whatnot. We don't even need names necessarily, but numbers are going to be key. But I think to Dave's point, with the 2 students, I think when you say, hey, this one particular place has a and goes back to what Vic was saying as well, one particular place has a person who is sick, well, let's take a look at that. Let's use technology to figure out where this person came from, whether they got sick on site or brought it in there. Was that room a sanitized room or not a sanitized room? And I think by using the technology, like what Vic was talking about with the sanitization tracking as well, is that you can say, hey, no, this just happened, in this particular space. Everything else is clean, and using contact tracing, no one else was touched by it, or Todd was touched by it, that put him already on 14 days, at home. Then you've already taken that and you've mitigated those risks at that. But that should also be reported up to public health so they can keep a good track of everything going on. But that's a legal question. Maybe
Really
Vic can talk.
varies a lot from state to state too on what the reporting requirements are and what's allowed and what's not. It's maybe this is one of the things too, that if there was a little bit more federal guidance on some level of standardization, that probably would be helpful in this particular topic as well too.
And that's why I was saying, and it seems in situations like this, and our subject now is COVID-19 and safety in general, but especially COVID-19, that's why I use the term, pay attention to the consciousness of your community, because to your point, every state is a little different, counties are a little different, but those communities tend to know, and that's why we have to have them wrapped around all of these things that we're talking about, so that when those decisions are made on a local level in a local school district, everybody's on board, as Todd was saying, with the students, with the parent, the PTAs, the unions, everyone, and then it is just much more smooth sailing.
Thank you. Okay, our next question. How are health symptom polls being used? Is it for students, staff, parents?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So, one of the things in general, parents are not being welcomed onto the school campuses in the same way that they used to be before the pandemic. I think one of the operating procedures is to try and keep as few people interacting as possible. And you see this in varying ways. Some places have even split up classrooms into A, B, and they have, the A part of the class go in Mondays and Tuesdays. They sanitize the school Wednesday. B goes in Thursday, Friday. Some do half days. I mean, whatever it is. But the basic principle is to try and keep out as many people as possible. So it's mostly focused, or entirely focused, frankly, on students and staff. And given the age of certain students, you may have parents involved in responding to the questionnaires and whether or not the student is positive or negative. But it's entirely focused at this point on that principle on students and staff.
Okay, just a couple more questions I see here. Do you recommend sending a survey every single day?
Yeah, I mean, again, just from what we've seen with clients that we're working with, they do send out every day. There are other things that might be more cumbersome and burdensome, right? I mean, if you're going to do a COVID test on people every day, I mean, maybe cost goes up or procedure goes up. But having an automated system is the best, because the sooner you identify who's sick, the sooner you stop spread, right? If there was one person who was sick and you caught that in one day, there's fewer people that they might have interacted with, rather than if you caught them at the end of the week, then there's a whole week of interactions. The goal, again, is keeping these sites open, which means you need to pluck out the people who are sick as quickly as possible. And the way to do that is by running, ideally every morning, an automated pre-screen. By the way, pre-screening does not have to be cumbersome or burdensome. Many of the sites just ask, are you positive or negative and or had any symptoms? Yes or no. It's one text message. It's one query on an app. It takes a second. So with that type of investment from the parent or student, it's a very small time price to pay for the benefit of keeping the schools open.
Right. And actually, regarding Titan HST, it's not even an app necessarily. It's app, text message, email, really whatever way the user prefers. Last question that I see here, unless we get any more. How often do you see the recurrence of the next pandemics? Should we expect another one in 100 years, or is it more like 2, 5, or 10 years?
I'll take that one. So I'm a bit of a bug chaser. I really, this is one of those things that I've really been involved with for many years, as far as epidemiology and that. And we've seen it. We've seen SARS, we've seen MARS, we've seen swine flu. These things come across every few years, and I think you're going to start seeing more of these exotics, if you will. The differences on this one compared to the others is we were able to get ahead of ourselves with the SARS epidemic, if you want to look at that one. Ebola is another one that you can kind of see coming up every once in a while. But as we're global. We're a globalized world now, and travel is fast, right? I mean, you can get from Japan to the United States in about 16 hours, where it used to take weeks, months to cross. So yeah, we're gonna see more of these. Hopefully, and realistically, I mean, as terrible as this is, as Dr. Long is pointing out, that the death rate is very low. I'm just hoping that we stay with these things that keep a low death rate, because if we get something that's more exotic that our bodies aren't used to, we might see worse. So we're in it for long term. And if you think about the flu A, right? Everybody gets the shot for the flu A now. That's the same strain, or a grandson strain, as they call it, as the flu that we had in 1918. So it's been with us for 100 years. I don't think COVID's going anywhere anytime soon.
And I do have one more question here. How accurate is taking temperature?
So I can speak to that based on the sites that we're working with. Temperature is fine. I mean, if you want to do it, it's great, but it doesn't do that much. A lot of businesses, it kind of reminds me of other programs that sometimes you have to do something to show that you're doing something. And I remember when we were in high school, we were talking with a law enforcement officer, and I asked him, I said, whatever happened to DARE? And if you guys remember the drug abuse resistance education, and he said, it was never proven to be particularly effective, but you have to do something to show, I mean, if you guys were like us and we were in 6th grade, 4th grade, 5th grade when it started, they came in with a coloring book, told you that drugs made you feel great and not to do them. So, I mean, it was something, but it didn't really do a whole lot. But you had to show that you were doing something, right? I think taking temperatures is much like that. When you look at the sites and you look at how it spreads, and then you query afterwards. So now that COVID's been around for 6 to 8 months, we have data that we didn't have 8 months ago. A lot of people are asymptomatic carriers. Very few people show fevers. So it's fine, but if you're going in, and I'm not a doctor, so I don't know the exact statistic on how many people have fevers or not, but it's suffice to say, when you look at the results of our contact tracing and pre-screening, the overwhelming majority of people who have COVID at the sites that we're at don't show fever. So, and the other thing that I'll say to that point is, people who have 104-degree fever, 103-degree fever, they don't feel well. They don't want to come to school. They don't want to go to businesses. So it's something to do, but as far as its overall effectiveness, you're probably not going to be catching that many people with that pre-screening method. And I see Todd shaking his head, so I think he's probably in agreement with what I'm saying.
Yeah, 100%. Vic, you're absolutely right. It's a late sign. And you're right. If you get that fever, you're probably not going to come into school or to work anyway, because you're feeling like not like wanting to go to school or work.
Yeah.
But just the ability to do the tracing of where you're at, and the ability for you to ask those questions. I had a cold the other day. I actually went and got tested because I just wanted to make sure, for my family's sake. And I just self-quarantined and stayed away, and just went and got the test done through Kaiser. That's who my provider is. It came back negative pretty quickly. But the point is that we have to teach people to be proactive on that, and say, when you don't feel good, just stay home, self-quarantine. If you really want to go get the test, go take the test. And they're like, if you have insurance, so there's free places to get them to through the public health department. You can get them taken for your own sake. So I did mine just for the sake of my own mind. I wasn't really too worried about having COVID necessarily if I was exposed, but I just wanted to make sure for my family that that's what it wasn't. So yeah, just make sure people are being smart, and again, we're educators, right? This is education. Help do that and go through that process. And that's all I can say on that. I don't want to stay on soapbox too long.
Okay, that's it for our questions. Todd, Dr. Long, Vic, is there anything additional you'd like to leave our guests with?
I'd like to mention one thing. I thought about it as I was sitting here and listening, and going back to the opening. Yes, Serene, we've known each other for years. Vic, we've known each other for years. And the reason that I'm here and talking today is because this is such a critical issue. And perhaps we'll have more of them. I think this is a very positive discussion. I think the information is the type of information that people need to hear. So first of all, thank you for allowing me to be here. But I want to go back to what I just said, and that is I'm here because of Vic. You have been a backer of Safe Schools. We have a Safe Schools conference each year. From day one, you've been involved. And I want to thank you for that, because this is all about safety. So when you asked me about this, of course, it took me a tenth of a second to say yes, because I know how you folks feel about the safety of our children in our schools. So I want to thank you for that.
Dave, thank you for that. And it's really funny that you mentioned that, because the point I wanted to leave in closing is, the future is coming, the future is coming. And you can either get pulled into the future kicking and screaming, or you can dive into the future and be proactive with it. Today, it's a pandemic. Yesterday, it was a school shooting. I mean, guys, just 2 weeks ago, we were used at a school shooting. The school had been open for 1 week, and in its first week, it had a school shooting. So, there haven't been school shootings in the last few months because schools were closed. So if it's not a school shooting, it's a natural disaster. If it's not a natural disaster, it's a pandemic. Come up with a good emergency plan. And if you have a good emergency communication system, a good emergency plan, then with one fell swoop, you can cover all of these things rather than always scrambling to have a new solution for a new problem, a new solution for a new problem. And that's what I'll kind of leave it with closing. Be prepared for communication and emergencies. And with that, whatever the next thing is that pops up, it'll be part of your existing playbook rather than a scramble to come up with a new solution.
Serene, Vic, Dave, thank you so much for having me here today as well. Vic, it's always a pleasure working with you. And, one of the reasons why I was drawn to Titan HST and to Vic and Serene specifically is because I know the dedication to safety, and that's what it's about. And that's I think we can't ask for more than that.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to everybody who attended. We will be sending you a copy of this video and hope to have more. Everybody have a wonderful day.
Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.